Good morning, and thank you, Mary. It's nice to see that in her full-time job right now of keeping Pastor Chuck in line as he recovers from his surgery, that she can still come and make beautiful music for us. So I appreciate that. I want to invite the children that are here to meet Pastor Justin in the back. You can be dismissed for Children's Church if you choose. So, we're kind of in a gap Sunday today. And in case you don't know, you may have seen Joel wandering around this morning, but he is now on his way with his family to the happiest place on earth, to Disney World. So, we just pray that they have a great time and a great trip as a family. And we wish them well. Advent doesn't start till next week, so I have this task of figuring out what to do out of all of the choices that are out there. And it reminded me, my kids used to love a certain poem that was written by Dr. Seuss. How many of you are Dr. Seuss fans? Yeah, lots of you. And this poem, it's tucked inside one of his books entitled The Sneetches and Other Stories, so it's one of the other stories. And the name of the poem is Too Many Days. And my kids loved it, first of all, because their dad's name is Dave. But they also loved it because of the humor and the instant laughter that it invoked. So if you'll indulge me today, I'm going to read you the poem, Too Many Days. Did I ever tell you that Mrs. McCabe had 23 sons, and she named them all Dave? Well, she did, and that wasn't a smart thing to do. You see, when she wants one and calls out, "Yoo-hoo, come into the house, Dave," she doesn't get one. All 23 Daves of hers come on the run. This makes things quite difficult at the McCabe's, as you can imagine, with so many Daves. And often she wishes that when they were born, she had named one of them Bodkin Van Horn, and one of them Hoosfoos, and one of them Snim, and one of them Hotshot, and one Sonny Jim. One of them Shadrach, and one of them Blinky, one of them Stuffy, and one of them Stinky. Another one Put-Put, another one Moonface, another one Marvin O'Gravel Balloon Face. One of them Ziggy, one Soggy Muff, one Buffalo Bill, and one Biffalo Buff. One of them Sneepy, and one Weepy Weed, and one Paris Garters, and one Paris Tweed. One of them Sir Michael Carmichael Zut, and one of them Oliver Bolivar Butt. And one of them Zanzibar Buck Buck McFate. But she didn't do it, and now it's too late. It's one of those poems where, kids have permission to say. Okay, sorry. Thank you for indulging me. So anyway, as I began to prepare for today, I kind of had this similar frustration as Mrs. McCabe. And I decided to look at one of my favorite gospel stories. We're coming into Advent, and I just want to encourage you all to just kind of soak yourself in Jesus, in the Gospels. Just live in the Gospels for the next few weeks. So that's where I went. But the story that I picked, my favorite, is the story of the woman with the alabaster jar. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. But this story is told in some form or another in all four Gospels. The details differ a little bit, just enough that some think that they describe different events. Some think they're all the same event, just from different perspectives. Only one identifies the woman by name, and that name is Mary. And you know about Mary, it's kind of like Dave in the Bible. There's so many Marys. So which one are we talking about? Well, this Mary is the Mary of Bethany, but some people think it's also about Mary of Magdala. And are they the same person? Again, different opinions. So it was kind of like, what did I get myself into here when I picked this story? Well, the things that they have in common is what I really want to focus on today. And for the most part, all four versions of this event point to this conclusion, and that is that Jesus longs. He longs for our love and our devotion. And not only that, he honors those who give their all, who give what cost them dearly as a demonstration of that love and devotion. So the most important thing we can do is to give all of our love, our gratitude for his goodness and his love toward us. So, the story. Let's go back to the story. As I mentioned before, it's told in some form in all four Gospels. But the setting is the same. It's a dinner party. Jesus is attending, and he's perhaps the guest of honor. And a woman enters and proceeds to anoint Jesus with expensive perfume. The accounts in Matthew and Mark are almost identical, focusing on the actions of the woman and then the disciples' reaction. The Luke account, on the other hand, focuses on Simon, who is named as the host, and kind of the conversation that he and Jesus have about the reputation of the woman and her actions. The John account is the most unique in that it identifies the woman and links her to a previous relationship with Jesus. So the location in Matthew, Mark, and John names the town of Bethany, and Bethany is only about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. Luke doesn't name the location, but they all take place in someone's home while a dinner party is in progress. The host in Matthew is identified, and Mark is identified as Simon the leper. In Luke, he's just named as a Pharisee, but later on Jesus calls him Simon. So probably all the same person. In John, the host is not named, but one of the honored guests is, and that's Lazarus. And if you remember, Lazarus was the man that Jesus raised from the dead, and it's thought that perhaps this dinner was in honor of that event. And we hear that in the John account that Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, are present. Martha is serving, which is familiar, and Mary is being named as the woman who anointed Jesus. So the main characters are Jesus and the woman. Jesus is the guest of honor. The setting is the time of Passover, most likely that week of, or they point to that week of Holy Week before Jesus' death, where they've come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, and it's the last week of Jesus' life. So the woman that is unnamed in the 3 accounts is identified, as I said, as Mary, the sister of Lazarus in John. He mentions her earlier as the one who anointed Jesus' feet with perfume. John makes no remarks about her character, but in the other passages, the woman is said to be a woman who led a sinful life. That could be anyone, be you and me. The other 3, the Pharisee in Luke is recorded as questioning why Jesus would let a woman that was unclean touch Jesus. So the thought was perhaps that she had an undesirable profession, that she was a prostitute. So the 2 accounts say the women anointed Jesus' head. The other 2 say that she anointed his feet. That she, in Luke, wiped them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. So then there is the perfume, the nard. The perfume that was poured out on Jesus was encased in alabaster. And alabaster is a soft marble or sandstone that can be carved and polished. and it was light in color. It had veins in it like marble does. And the jar was sealed, so it required that it be broken in order for the contents to be poured out, and they had to all be used at once because you couldn't recap the jar, so to speak. The jar in our story is said to have contained 2 pints, or 2 cups, 1 pint of nard. That's a lot. That's a lot of oil. And it was pure nard. Nard was derived from a flowering plant, kind of like lavender. It's known as spikenard or muskroot. And it grows only in the Himalayas and in China and in India, so it was an import as well. It's very aromatic and dark amber in color, and it's been used since ancient times as a perfume, as a medicine, and in religious use as incense on the altar or for burial. John states that it was worth a year's wages, 300 denarii. A denarius is about $1.70, and that was a day's pay for a common laborer or a soldier in those days. So 300 denarii would be about $500. But think about a common income for a soldier or a common worker in our day. That's a lot of money. So the reactions were varying. There were Matthew and Mark, it was the disciples. They reacted very strongly. They were indignant, saying, "This is a terrific waste." The perfume, they said, could be sold and the money given to the poor. Luke, as I said, focused on Simon, the host, and he was concerned about the reputation of the woman, the fact that she was touching Jesus. And then John singles out Judas as objecting to this wasteful act, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and a keeper of the money bag. He would often help himself to the contents. So I would like to focus a little bit more now on the actions of the woman and the response of Jesus. And I'd like to look together at the account in the book of John, contrary to what your bulletin says, your worship folder. I know in my dilemma I changed my mind about 3 times which one I was going to use. So we're going to read the John passage together, and I would like to invite you to stand while I read these verses. John 12, 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it out on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." You may be seated. So in this account, the woman, as I said before, is identified as Mary of Bethany. Mary of Mary and Martha fame, and you know that story. Jesus was a guest in the home of Martha and Mary, and Martha was occupied with preparing the meal and serving the Lord, feeding and caring for his physical needs. But Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet, listening and hanging on every word that he uttered. Martha asked Jesus to please tell Mary to get up and help her with the meal. Jesus gently scolded Martha, saying, "Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." Well, we see Mary and Martha again when their brother Lazarus falls sick. The sisters sent word to Jesus to come. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had died and had been in the tomb for 4 days. The women came to Jesus out on the road and asked him why he hadn't gotten there sooner and why he hadn't been there to help them. And again, Mary falls at his feet, weeping in her grief at losing her brother. Jesus, out of his love for these three, weeps with them. And then he calls Lazarus out of his tomb, brings him back to life. When Jesus returns to Jerusalem for the Passover, that is when we find him once again in the company of these dear friends, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. Lazarus is with Jesus at the table. Martha is once again concerned about serving the meal. And Mary enters with a jar, a pint of costly oil. Where did this come from? Had she gotten it as a gift? Sometimes it was an heirloom that was passed down from generation to generation. It could only be used once, and it was usually saved for burial. Jesus was still alive, but for some reason, Mary decided that this was the time, that this was who she had saved this precious oil for. So she broke it open, and she poured the entire contents out onto Jesus' feet. It must have been somewhat of an impulse because she did not even have a towel with which to wipe up and distribute the oil. So she let down her hair, and she used her unbound hair to wipe the excess oil from Jesus' feet. If you want, just close your eyes for a minute and just picture the scene. Take in the heaviness of that perfume that was beginning to fill the room. Imagine the looks on the faces of all the others there, all the things that were going through their minds. This was extravagance beyond any of their means. It was wasteful in many of their minds. And Mary, what was she thinking, touching Jesus in such an intimate way and going so far as to let her hair down in public, something that would certainly bring her shame? She risked her life savings, her reputation, to show her deep love and gratitude to Jesus, who had given her back her brother, had given her dignity and respect by allowing her to sit at his feet and be taught as a woman. For Mary, there was no one else in the room. Nothing else mattered. This was the only way that she could think of to show her undying love for Jesus. And she did it despite the great personal cost. She gave her all. And what did Jesus do? He didn't push her away. He didn't try to talk her out of it. He didn't even scold her. Instead, he understood. She once again had chosen what was better. And it did not matter what others thought or that she had exposed herself shamelessly in public. She would be remembered for her act of extravagant love for eternity. And that's in all 4 versions, by the way. And what was the better that she chose? To simply be with Jesus. To find a way, any way, to express her deep, deep love for him. To throw off her own shame and self-consciousness. To deepen her relationship and her proximity to Jesus. In the 1300s, the Black Plague was devastating the United Kingdom. The plague came in several waves over a period of 300 years, wreaking havoc and certain painful death on all who succumbed. It took too long to realize that the culprits were the rodents that came in on the ships from across the sea. The shipping town of Norwich was particularly stricken, as its population of nearly 12,000 people was reduced by 70%. One survivor in Norwich was a young Benedictine nun. She took the name of Julian after the Church of St. Julian in the town of Norwich. And it was believed in those times that the plague was the judgment of God upon the people for their sin. And the people cried out daily for God's mercy. Julian prayed and asked God to help her in 3 specific ways. She prayed that she would understand the cross, that she would overcome her fear of judgment and death, and that she would come to trust God more. It would be 10 years before God answered that prayer. And what she describes, they're known as the showings, began when Julian was 30 and had grown suddenly ill. Thinking she was about to die of the plague, a priest came to read her last rites. And in that process, he held a crucifix up for her to gaze at. And for 10 hours, Julian stared at this crucifix and engaged in a conversation with the bleeding, dying Jesus. During this conversation, Jesus addressed those questions that she had asked 10 years ago. Jesus showed her that her sin was not an insurmountable problem. It separates us from God, but his death changes everything. Sin no longer has the final word, and that's been the message of the Reformation series that we just completed. God never despises what he has made. We are soul and body clad and enclosed in the goodness of God. This goodness is beyond comparison, for it wraps and enfolds us, embraces us and guides us, surrounds us for his love, which is so tender that he may never desert us. And those are Julian's words. He showed her a hazelnut lying in the palm of her hand as a symbol of everything that is made, everything that God loves, that he will preserve, forcing her to conclude that his deep, deep love is wide and it covers us, it covers it all. Julian recovered from her mysterious illness. She then committed to becoming an anchoress. This involved allowing herself to be enclosed, literally bricked in, to a small room adjoining the nave of the church. She had 3 windows, one that faced into the church so that she could participate in Mass and receive the sacraments, and the one which she received food and things that she needed for her personal needs, and another that faced the street so that people could come and converse with her and glean from her wisdom and her knowledge. It was during this time that she wrote down all that she had learned from Jesus in those 10 hours of conversation. And it became a book entitled Revelations of Divine Love. And it was the first English book ever written by a woman. Survives to this day. She remained in this cell, in this anchoress, for 30 years. Such was her love and her devotion to Jesus. Her life of devotion can be evidenced in this prayer. God of goodness, give me yourself. You are enough for me. I can ask for nothing less, for then I would not be worshiping you. And if I ask for anything less, I will always be left wanting. Only in you do I have everything. Maybe God isn't asking you to brick yourself into a cell for 30 years. Maybe he isn't even asking you to give up your most prized possession, your perfume poured out for him. What he might be asking is for us to just notice him, to begin by stopping all of our doing and our scurrying about long enough to realize that we are surrounded continually by his goodness, that we have his unfailing, unconditional love and his constant presence. And all he really wants, what he longs for from us is our gratitude that is poured out by us giving our all to be with him, to return his love and longing for us with our love and longing for him. To give thanks in all circumstances, to say with the psalmist and with Mary that you have turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever. To come unashamed into his outstretched arms, that's what he wants. We're ready to bridge from Thanksgiving into Advent. What better time to come with gratitude before Jesus, to focus on him, to let his very presence be the reason that we come and prepare and lean into this season of his coming, that we focus on his light in this season. I've asked my daughter Heather to sing a song today in conclusion. This is part of the sermon, probably could have been the whole sermon. And this song is called Overwhelmed. So I want this song to be your song as we move, as I said, into Advent in preparation for the coming Lord. So listen carefully. You are Mary, pouring out your love and thanksgiving to Jesus.
I hear the sound of your voice. All I want is a gentle and thundering noise. Oh God, all that you are is so overwhelming. I delight myself in you, captivated by your beauty. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms.
with me, please. Gracious God, we do love you. We owe everything to you. All that you have done is so overwhelming. Let us delight in you. Let us show our continual love, devotion, and gratitude to you with our whole hearts. Thank you for your gifts to us. I pray this in your name. Amen. So as we close, we're going to do something a little bit unusual. I'm going to invite you to stand. We're going to sing the doxology, but we're going to do it a cappella. And we're going to, if you're comfortable, ask you to join hands with the people in your row. And we're going to sing each syllable, each note, and kind of hang on each note. You'll catch on right away. And as you do that, I want you to just gradually lift your hands till we get to the end. So Dan's going to start us out here. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Amen. Go in peace.